They found Brock Turner behind a dumpster on top of the partially nude body of a passed-out woman outside a frat party at Stanford University last year. The judge sentenced him to 6 months in prison and 3 years probation on 3 felony counts. But wait until you hear his dad's plea for leniency. I'm Scott Ott with Stephen Green and Bill Whittle, and this is Right Angle, made possible by members at BillWhittle.com. Well, men, Brock Turner could have received 14 years in prison for what he did to that drunken, unconscious stranger, but his dad told the judge that his son should receive mere probation so that he could, quote, give back to society in a net positive way. For example, Dan Turner wrote, instead of having to register as a sex offender for the rest of his life, young Brock could educate others on college campuses about, quote, how society can begin to break the cycle of binge drinking and its unfortunate results. Well, so far, most folks can understand the love of a father for his son and his almost expected plea for mercy, but that's not what set off a storm on social media. Dan Turner's letter talked of Brock's love of food and his dad's joy in grilling ribeye steak for him and providing his favorite snacks after a long swim team practice. But now, poor Brock eats only to exist, his dad says. The guilty verdict shattered him and stole his appetite. But here's the kicker. All of this hardship for young Brock, Dad said, is, quote, a steep price to pay for 20 minutes of action out of his 20-plus years of life, end quote. Now, Stephen Green, the dad's letter and the light sentence have sparked outrage, but the judge said Brock Turner had no significant criminal record and a long prison term would have a severe impact on him, and that, and here's a quote from the judge, there is less moral culpability attached to the defendant who is intoxicated. Now, don't you agree, Steve, with the judge's attempt at restorative justice?
Yeah, boo friggin' who for this kid. You know, if you can't be trusted around a passed-out woman, I don't care if she's drunk, passed out, or just asleep. If you can't be trusted around a sleeping woman, then you probably can't be trusted around a child. You are not a fit member of civilization. You have to go in the penalty box, and for a lot longer than 6 months. That's just it. And you know, the sins of the sons are not necessarily the sins of the father. But when you have a dad who comes out like this in defense of his rapist son, then yeah, I think that dad did some bad parenting somewhere along the line. And to set this example for his son, and then to behave that way in public, write a letter to a judge, an open letter to a judge for this, it's unimaginable in my mind. And I'm a dad of 2 sons, and God, I hope I'm raising them better than that. You know what? I have one small, tiny bit of experience with something like this. It was when I was a freshman or a sophomore at Mizzou, University of Missouri. And I was always up at all hours. That was kind of my thing. I rarely went to sleep before Tuesday or Wednesday. And so people would show up in my room drunk on Friday or Saturday night, have a place to hang out, talk to Steve, have some fun. A friend of mine, she came to my room, and when I say friend, I mean actually friend. She came to my room super late on a Friday or Saturday night. She did pass out. Some other guy who I kind of tangentially knew showed up along with some other people. Other people left. This one guy stayed. And he suggested we do something with my friend while she was passed out. Well, I summarily kicked him out, never spoke to him again. The next day, I'll change her name to something else, Betty. I told Betty what had happened the next day, and at lunch in the cafeteria, keep in mind this gal was tiny, 5 foot nothing, maybe 90 pounds soaking wet. She went up to this guy in the cafeteria and she decked him. Now, oh yeah, she landed him flat on the floor. I mean, an uppercut, boom, dropped him. Just an amazing hit. And I'll tell you what, maybe he could have filed charges against her for assault, but I'll tell you what, I don't think in those days, 30 years ago, those charges would have stuck, and I hope they wouldn't stick today.
You know, it occurs on hearing Steve's description of that you would like to think that if you came across a similar situation, the first thing to do would be to take out the cell phone and call the ambulance, and the second thing would be to make sure that the woman was safe. Now, Bill, in a long letter to the judge, the victim, whose name remains anonymous, wrote that leniency would send the wrong message to privileged college athletes. Remember, they were at Stanford. She said a poor kid who didn't acknowledge his guilt the way Turner had not, but was convicted of 3 felonies, would get a much harsher sentence. How do you find justice in a case like this, Bill?
Wow. This is such an interesting story for so many reasons. As I think I mentioned to you yesterday on the conference call, the first thing I'm so, I don't want to say I'm happy that we're doing this story, needless to say, but yeah. I think the thing that's relevant about this story is the 3 of us have fought this idea of this rape culture, this kind of misogynist, woman-hating rape culture that exists on college campuses. And remember the Rolling Stones story with this absolutely fictional case, and entire fraternities are indicted for things that they didn't do, and so on. And we've come out pretty strongly against that because we believe in justice. And if these young men didn't do anything, then their lives are being destroyed. They're being as destroyed as a victim of rape is. It's really unfair. And the reason I think this story is an interesting one for us to cover is because all 3 of us have the same reaction to this. Nobody's saying, oh, well, boys will be boys, and the girls were asking for it and she shouldn't have been drinking. We have a set of standards, and the standards is if you didn't commit a crime like this and you've been accused of one, then you've been accused of something absolutely horrible. But if you did commit it, then you are not only responsible for that crime and the damage to the individual person that you've harmed for the rest of her life, you're also responsible to this sort of sense of reinforcing a narrative that didn't exist. Now, that's not on his mind, obviously, but it's one of the consequences of this thing. I think the one thing that everybody can agree on is this. For a father to use a term like that, 20 minutes of action, it's beyond tone deaf. Tone deaf means that maybe you don't even hear the notes. This is just plain deaf. I mean, this is just, it's not a question of he can't tell which note is higher than the other. He just doesn't hear any music at all. You have to assume, I think let me rephrase that. It's a safe assumption that the young man's ethics have come in large part from his father. I mean, there's no remorse here. There's no sense of really responsibility. This idea of his son is going to go out and do, 100 hours of community service talking about the dangers of society and binge drinking. He wasn't interested in talking about the dangers of society and binge drinking before he got arrested and convicted of rape. So the whole thing just smells of people just trying to get out of it. As far as the sentence goes, look, jail time is jail time. Sexual offender tag on your life is serious. I don't know what anybody else would have gotten, but I think that the fact that the kid was drunk is in some level somewhat mitigating. It doesn't excuse the rape. It doesn't mean he didn't commit it. But to the degree of the punishment, I suspect the judge probably has a bit of a case there. Listen, if the victim feels that he didn't get the punishment he deserved, then that's another form of rape. I'm on her side on this one. This is not messing around. This is serious business, and it should be treated seriously. And it's just a horrible story. And Scotty, I don't know if you're going to mention this in the close, but we've covered these kind of issues before. You'd been a rape counselor before. And one of the reasons that the 3 of us attack rape stories that didn't happen so vehemently is not only because of the innocence of the people that have been accused, but because it does, in fact, pull away attention and time and credibility and resources for people who actually have undergone this. And this is a horrible thing to happen. And I think the kid deserved every second of this and more.
Yeah, I did work as a phone counselor for a domestic abuse and rape hotline for an organization called the Abuse Network. And it is the most difficult thing in the world we weren't in the job of persuading women. We were just offering resources to them, letting them know what their options were. But, the more you hear about these cases, the more you hear the reluctance of women to come forward and report things. And any false accusation, in fact, makes it much more difficult for them to come forward because it casts more doubt upon them. And so, I think that you point out accurately that as people who come at it from sort of the right side, if you want to look at it that way, or conservatives, need to evaluate this in light of justice, not just as a reaction against some politically correct movement, but actually look at the situation in the case. The judge in Brock Turner's case has a lot to consider. The harm to the victim, the danger to other potential victims, the hope of preventing a repeat by Turner himself and of deterring others, the corrosive effect of confining Turner among seasoned criminals in prison. The people who know what's right and what's wrong once brought a woman to Jesus and told the wandering teacher that she'd been caught having sex with a man who wasn't her husband. The law at that time called for such a woman to be stoned to death. It was an easy case. Multiple witnesses, the law clear, the penalty obvious. But Jesus didn't jump at the obvious answer. He took a moment. He squatted down and drew with his finger in the dirt. And finally, as the court of public opinion glared at him, eager for judgment, Jesus said he agreed that she should be stoned to death, and he gave instructions about how to carry out the execution. Let he who is without sin cast the first stone. The accusers slowly shuffled away, silenced by the recognition of their own guilt. Brock Turner has an opportunity to see the wrong not only in his actions on that night in January 2015, but the wrong in himself, and to realize that 6 months is nothing compared to what he deserves. He can't change the past. But each of us who hears and shares his story also has the opportunity for reflection, for repentance, and to pray for forgiveness and restoration. If I want justice in this land, let it start with my behavior. If I want mercy, let me be the first to show it. For Bill Whittle, Stephen Green, and the Right Angle team, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com who brought you this episode. If you become a member, you'll unlock even more like it.